Thank you so much, Hunter. Now, Rachel and I also know each other. We've gotten to host a number of chats together, so I'm very excited to dive in there. Before we do, I just want to highlight Rachel's company, WOKEN, which she founded. It's an online career exploration platform, and it's designed to coach professionals through that process of clarifying your ideal job and your career path. Now, I love getting to sit in on these chats with Rachel because I always learn something new. But to get us started here, let's talk about kind of some of the backstory. How did you come up with this process of career path exploration? How did you make a path or some sort of process from the myriad options that a lot of us have in front of us?
Yeah, well, to create the career path exploration process that we offer and use today, that WOKEN has built, there was actually a lot of ways that it sort of came together. So firstly, I was trying to figure out my own path, and I spent about 6 years of like extremely intentional effort and experiments and just trying to do whatever I could to do a little research, do a little networking, do some hands-on volunteering, showing up to conferences, the amount of learning and reflection, getting mentors. I was really just doing anything that I could to deliberately figure out what do I want to do and what is my best fit path and direction. I even received some career coaching. I sought out different experiences. And after about 6 years, I figured out, what I want to do. And so I did get coaching training. And that's sort of the moment that I realized I really like to do career coaching, but I also like the digitization and systematization of things. So I started building tools around it. And really, I was reflecting back on what did I try? What did I do? What worked well? What didn't work well? And how can I make it more efficient for someone else to navigate that learning and reflection journey? To keep it practical, to keep it effective, to keep it efficient. I was also reflecting on the jobs that I had and sort of the breakdown of what was a fit in terms of the role, what was a fit in terms of the industry, what was a fit or not in terms of the environment. So I was sort of reflecting on the jobs that I held, as well as what efforts work or don't to help someone gain clarity. It took me a few years, and then I sort of truncated that into a process where we can handhold someone through those steps in a way that feels more feasible than, usually it's this daunting, never ending, years long, decades long, like we're just so stressed and lost and confused. So how can we make that, feel a little easier, more structured, and really get you to the output of saying, okay, I actually have learned enough about the roles that exist, and I've learned enough about myself that I can feel good pursuing whatever path it is.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, right? I don't know about our audience. Obviously, I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I very much came up through, kind of the like college to career pipeline, right? And this idea that within reason, get a college degree. That's how you get a good job. And then from there, you just get to follow kind of up a ladder. And I feel like the more we talk about non-traditional careers, the more we find out how many people have really had them. Because I don't know about you, I feel like I hear way more about people saying, well, I have a really non-traditional background than I do from anybody saying, well, it's all kind of gone according to plan or something.
Yeah.
So when it comes to this idea of that path and kind of going to explore that, or when it comes to thinking in terms of like your ideal career, how do you define that?
Define which element exactly?
Let's start with the finding your ideal fit. Obviously the path is how you get there, but which one is kind of putting the cart before the horse? Do you need to understand like how you define an ideal career for yourself?
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So the way I use a lot of words like ideal, suitable, whatever word you want to use. But yes, the way I think about our goal, let's say, is in terms of a role, right? There's 3 parts to this framework. There's a role, a job role, right? You're applying to a job posting. There's a role, and a solid 80% of what the interview is all about, maybe more, 80, 90%, is what are you going to be doing all day? And are you a fit? And do you know how to do this job? Obviously, there's also, are you a culture fit? And why do you want to work here? And are you interested and aligned with our industry? But the role is the crux of what are you going to be doing all day, all week? So the way I like to think about that is, do you understand your own affinities and tendencies and what you're natural at and what you're great at and what you enjoy doing, or maybe your propensities of what you could get great at? And then in relation to the style of the work. So if you think about a role, it's what activities and skills and projects are incorporated or entailed in your week, in a typical week. Then there's the industry. So role and industry, two separate things. Many roles exist in many industries. Industry is kind of like, what's the ultimate purpose of why we're all here? What is the sector or the mission or the problem that we're solving? What does this company do and why and how? So that's the ultimate kind of problem we're all solving. And you can really align that with your personal interests of what problems in the world do you care about? You know, for example, my early career started out in financial services, and then I realized I literally just have no personal interest. And I'm not saying anyone should or shouldn't. It's just, you want to get to a point where you're saying, you know what? These types of products and services are innovative and intriguing and important to me. Financial services has a lot of reasons why it could be important to someone, right? What do you find intriguing, innovative, important as it relates to a problem that we're solving, a product or a service? Then there's the environment. So you need to know what work environment you thrive in, you know, whether that's the logistics. Do I want fully remote, hybrid, in person? Do I want to travel? The pace, the size of the organization, as well as the people, the culture, the vibe, the personality, the values. How do we all operate together? So I like to think about each of those three buckets. And instead of just saying, oh, like, what's my dream career? Like you said, let's break it down into these parts, and it's okay to be a little realistic. Like, we don't need to be like, oh, what's this perfect dream scenario? If you break it into each of those three components, you can ask yourself some of these reflection questions to, you know, uncover what do I want? What's natural for me? What makes sense for me? And then, you know, what are some realistic pathways and avenues that feel aligned, right? And, you know, the way I like to think about it too is, it's like this informed experiment. You might ask yourself these questions. You might go after a certain role and a path. And then every 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years, when you're ready for the next challenge, you go through the thought process again, because you're going to change as a person. The world is going to change. These roles change. So career exploration, you absolutely can and should do it at any transition moment, but you can also do it again later. And then when you do that exercise more than once over the course of your career, all of a sudden, by the time you've changed roles, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times every few years, that's eventually, like, in the long term, a few years in, that's really where you get to the point of saying, I've now done a few different roles or industries that are like similar, but that's really where you get, like, you can crystallize like your broader mission, because with every job change, you want to get, you know, you want to be more informed and sort of get closer and closer and closer with every single change. So every job change is an opportunity to reflect on the last one and say, here's what I want to do more of or less of with the next one. So if you're intentional with every single change and do that exercise every single time you change roles, eventually you're going to be like, you know, and even with the first time you do it, you'll still feel good and you'll still feel clear. But when you do it a few times, all of a sudden you're like, I really know my place in this world, in this professional world. So it just doubles down when you do it even more, you know?
Yeah. And I really like this because, you know, as you're kind of taking things off of, you know, what is the industry, what is the setting, what is the environment for the team, like I like this because, like, it could initially sound like, okay, well, you're adding a lot of things that you now have to figure out. It's like, no, you're taking small bites out of the giant question of, where do I want to go?
Yes.
And what do I need in my life that currently isn't? Will that impact like where I can go in the future? So I think that's awesome. All right, let's step back a little bit and let's talk about what differentiates this process, this career exploration process. What makes WOKEN's idea different from other ways that people have tried to do this in the past, or other other frameworks that they might be familiar with?
Yes. So Well, the first thing is we do have these career assessments that exist, but when you take like a one-time assessment, there's a few issues. Number one, a lot of these tools are over-engineered or over-automated or some multiple choice matching situation. I don't believe over-engineering the technology can truly help understand a human in a one-time assessment. So our process is, I'll say ongoing, but again, it doesn't have to take forever. It could take a month or 2 or 3. It's really up to your pace of your efforts, but you need to start with reflection. Then when you uncover some roles and industries that are options, then you do a little research, then you do a little networking. So there's continued learning about what exists in the world and continued learning about yourself all at the same time over the course of a few weeks, where we increase the information and we increase the reflection incrementally. So that, time element to it helps a lot. You're in the driver's seat, so you're going to be the one doing the research, doing the networking, having it firsthand versus like, sometimes when it's a little too passive, like, oh, I'm just reading about these roles. And then I sit there and I'm like, what does this mean? It needs to be active. It needs to be you soliciting and actively synthesizing the information, making sense of it and relating to it and say, this sounds interesting and aligned, or this doesn't. And that is also predicated on building the self-awareness, right? So it's combination, learning what exists, and learning about yourself all at the same time. The other element is there's a iterative nature. So every time you learn, you're going to synthesize what you learn and then you pivot. So every single week you're connecting the dots and saying, you know what, this sounds more interesting. This sounds less interesting. What do I need to go do, learn more about or learn less about? And you keep going through these little mini pivots. That's another element that really brings you to that end point of saying, I actually have confidence. I actually have certainty in the end because I've made these little loops of like, what's the gap of my knowledge? What do I know? What do I not know? What do I feel hesitant on? What do I not sure about? How do I just like keep assessing where do I stand and what else do I need, whether it's reflection or learning? The other secret sauce of this whole thing is networking and hosting informational chats with professionals. When you learn firsthand, you have to really run these conversations well. A lot of people show up to networking and they just don't know what to ask. So really make sure you know how to handle that conversation. But when you know what to ask, you really can deeply understand a picture of what a role is. And you may uncover roles that you've never even heard about. You really want to get so clear into like the way the world works and learn firsthand from people in these different roles. I'll add one more component is you're not just going to talk to one person in the role. I love when, you'll ask similar questions to, let's say, 3 or 5 or 10 people in that same function or team or industry. All of a sudden, when you ask similar questions to different people and a volume of people, you're going to more deeply understand how is this role similar across organizations? How is this role different across organizations? And you just really deeply ingrain that learning. So learning is the basis plus reflection. I could probably go on other reasons, but I'll pause there. That's a little bit about kind of how the process works and why it's unique.
I love this. We're getting a ton of great questions in the chat thread. A lot of them are dovetailing with some stuff we're going to talk about in a couple minutes here. But so please keep sending in your questions, y'all. I want to make sure that we get to answer as many as possible, but don't feel like you're not getting answers. We've got, we're noting these questions so that I can keep weaving them in here. All right, before we leave this kind of topic area, what are some resources that are available for individuals who are really struggling to find their best fit? Obviously WOKEN is a huge resource that we want to encourage people to take advantage of. Right. But if they're also looking for, like you said, multiple sources and multiple resources here, do you have areas that you would direct people to initially? Yeah, I mean, yes, obviously we've built all of this for a reason. So we are here as a resource, and that's iamwoken.com. But look, you're going to do a little bit of online research. There's a lot of free resources out there, whether it's blogs and articles and YouTube and just reading a little bit about the roles and the industries and what information is available to you. Networking is another resource that's available to you, which is
how can you get introductions and meet the professionals in the roles in the industries that you're considering? That's a resource. These people are resources. Experiential learning, skill development, hands-on learning is another resource, but I like to do that towards the end when you already you can really gain clarity largely from the initial reflection and the research and the networking. You can't do every single course under the sun. So I like to decide on the upskilling opportunities when you have a better idea of you think you want to do this role. Now I'm going to go train up and get those skills. So that's another resource. What else? Let me think. I would say, honestly, peers, mentors, and coaches, right? Career coaches, sometimes we forget are a thing. We're here. Hello. And so I love, Power to Fly is an awesome community because you have peers, you get accountability, you get motivation, you get tips and guidance from other people going through that journey. So you want people around you. Some people might find communities that maybe we're doing co-working, maybe we're meeting once a week. How am I going to stay accountable to this by other people who are in that journey? That's a resource to have support as to how do I navigate this, right? There's career-based resources and guidance and support to navigate these processes. And then there's resources that are information about the roles and industries that you're considering. Both sides are really important to know what to be doing, how to go about it, stay motivated, stay accountable. That could come from peer communities or, like I said, career coaches as well, to make sure you have the one-on-one support that you need. Yeah, that's kind of my quick thoughts. I mean, yeah, I'll pause there.
Well, and I want to highlight for everybody, I can try and grab some links in the chat here in a little bit, but Rachel has been a guest of Power to Fly multiple times. So there already exists like a bunch of video resources on Power to Fly's y'all can start digging into, where we have had time to go over some of these questions in more depth. Kind of in addition to the resources that you can find on IamWoken.com. So I'm grabbing all those links, and Rachel, thank you for sharing that link as well. Throw that in the chat right there. Okay, so let's kind of step back here and we'll take a little bit more of a broad view. When we're thinking in terms of this process and how long it takes, what are some of the major milestones or like kind of, major turning points that you can expect along this journey? And then like what time frame should we be considering?
Yeah. So the timeline depends on how much time you want to put in. When I guide someone through this, I think the shortest I ever saw someone go through it was about 1 month, but they were like treating it like a full-time job. This was someone who wasn't working. So if you have, 5 to 7 hours a day and you're like, I just want to figure out my path and I need a process and I need tools and I need to know how to do exploration, you could devote a fair amount of time in just a few weeks. On average, when I see someone take about 2 to 3 hours a week, it takes about 2 to 3 months. But I've also seen people who say, I want to go a little slower, and that's fine too. So it's totally a choice. There is effort involved, right? We can't just have answers come out of thin air. So the more effort you put in, the more information and clarity you're going to receive at whatever pace feels good to you. But it does not have to take a year. I usually see give or take 2 to 3 months if you're staying on track. In terms of the milestones, I mean, the key initial parts of this process are like initial robust self-reflection. That's milestone number 1, is those 3 parts that I mentioned, which is the function, the content, the environment, which eventually will translate into role, industry, environment. So you want to reflect, then you want to come up with some options, then you want to do a little bit of research, and then you want to do a lot of networking. So at each of those components, those are sort of the phases and the milestones. But in terms of how you may feel along the journey, I actually have this great, I don't know if I should share my screen, but there's this image, if anyone has ever seen the design thinking image, where it's this like crazy squiggle, you're going to feel all over the place with the journey. Nothing is linear, right? We talked about how careers will zig and zag. In this process, you are going to feel it's going to have ups and downs. It's going to be sideways, backwards. It's literally going to be upside down. It's going to feel topsy-turvy. It's going to be, all over the place. And that's normal. You're learning a lot. You're feeling a lot. And look, if you didn't feel sort of like all this craziness, then we wouldn't be learning something. So we need the information to sort of trigger reflections one way or another, right? Part of exploration is figuring out the roles that are not a fit. So you sort of need to buckle up and expect a lot, right? You're going to be figuring out this big question, which is, who am I and what roles should I play? And what am I natural at? Where do I fit? And there's a big emotions involved in that. And there's a lot of big questions involved in that. So you're going to have a lot of big feelings involved. So that's normal. And that's why it's good to have support on your side to navigate all of that. You also, I saw a question about roadblocks, limiting beliefs sometimes arise. There's any number of things you may be questioning about, like your capabilities. What do you want? What do you want to get good at, right? What are you capable of? There's a lot of reasons why you would want support to make sure that those thoughts and hesitations are natural, but turning those into questions where you can get information and just simply making sure that you're making informed decisions, and not ruling things out, right? It's hard to make sense of all this information. So you want another pair of eyes and ears to make sure that you're parsing things and you're synthesizing things and relating them to yourself in a way that is fair to you, right?
No, I think this is absolutely excellent information here. Okay, so we're going to go in a little bit more on the potential roadblocks, but before we do that, how do you know when you're done? Does that exist? Is there a finish line?
That's a great question. If you are not feeling sure yet, or if you have multiple options for roles or industries, it means you need to do a little bit more learning and or reflection. So the other way I like to think about this is, like, I would encourage people to clarify, give or take 60-70% of it is like, what role or industry is a good fit for me right now or as my next step. You do want to understand where it could set you up to go in the future, but you don't need to feel like I need to make this decision of what I'm going to be in 30 years or 50 years or however long it's going to be. You're going to change and the world's going to change. So you want to understand where these roles could lead you and feel like you're open and excited by the possibilities, because, by the way, one role could lead to a bunch of different paths in the future, right? So I like to over-index on what feels like a right fit right now. And then once you're in that great role and that great company, then it becomes, where do we go from here? So I like to over-index on the right now. That makes it a little easier to come to some decisions about what's a fit for you today. And so, yeah, if you still have options, you want to learn more or reflect more and figure out, what are your uncertainties? What are the gaps? And do I need more information, or do I need to reflect? The other way to think about it is, you're just simply getting confidence in your prioritization. It's not to say that your second choice role or second choice industry is something you can never do. It's more, if there's differences between this role and that role, what are the differences and how do they relate to you? Right? If there's any difference, am I more inclined or more aligned with this role versus that role? And here's why, right? Look at the differences between, it's good to notice similarities and trends, but mainly, what are those differences and how do they relate to you, right? Whether it's the role that you'd be the best fit for or the industry you're most interested in. So that's another way of thinking about it, is the confidence in the prioritization that you have is another way to feel like, I can get to that reasonable outcome of clarity versus feeling like it's this, I can never get this clarity, right? It's not to say you can never go do those other things.
Yeah, like I could easily see this becoming one of those things of like, well, I'm on the path to nirvana. I might be about 800 light years from getting there. Exactly. And so I think that's a good way to think about it, because, this idea of like, oh, I'll find my perfect fit could very easily feel aspirational, but yet not realistic. So I think that's good. Yeah. All right, we've got 5 minutes left in today's session. Let's talk about some of the roadblocks. What do you think trips most people up about this? What are some of the roadblocks or the challenges people need to be aware of as they're starting this journey? Yes, I think there's a lot. So first and foremost, just know that all the hesitations are normal. Like, I've heard all of them, and just know that you're human, know that it's okay. And whatever your hesitation is, get support through it. Don't let it keep you stuck. Because I'll give you a few examples, but just know that it's all normal and it's all okay. And it's all something you can overcome 100%. People worry, I think, about capabilities, like, am I going to be capable of a certain path, right? Remember to gather information before you understand whether you can or can't do something. I think people look at their background and say,
am I going to be able to pivot into this thing if I only rely on, I've only ever done these things before? How could I pivot into something new? I have seen people, I've helped people pivot in 180-degree directions. So if you're open to, it might take a little time, it might take a little effort, it might take a little skill development, but give yourself the benefit of the doubt of understanding what are the roles that are fit for me? What would the journey be realistically to break into that path, and understanding the nuances of how people typically break in and using that to inform your decision. If you know that you don't want some big upskilling journey or further education, you can still understand, what would I love to do? And then are there other similar roles that are a little easier to break into? So clarify things first and strategize second, right? Yeah, I think people worry about the timeline. I think people worry about, the level of like upskilling it may require. I think people worry about their age or their stage in the career, and like, can I still make this change? The answer is yes. I've seen it done at all ages. I've seen people who are retiring, figuring out the next chapter. I've seen and helped with mid-career pivots, early career. There's no stage that's too late. Just remember that information are going to drive your decision. So if you're not sure about something, learn more. And if something feels too big of a change, you don't have to go make any change or take any action until you understand what feels good and what feels comfortable to you. There's a lot of other probably like mindsets and roadblocks that arise, but I'll pause for now. Those are like some of the top, burning ones.
Okay. Last thing I want to touch on is something you mentioned at the end of that answer. When should people pursue this process? If it's never too late to start, is it possible to do it too early? Is there, a way to figure out like timing is not right for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Never too early, really. But when is the time right? Look, job search, first and foremost, you need security in your life. And if you need to land a job quickly, you might want to look at things that you've done in the past to be able to land that next job quickly. If you have a little time on your side and you're feeling ready to say, I need a change, I need a role that's a better fit, that's a perfect opportunity to do it. If you have a little extra time on your side to afford the ability to do that, even better. But really, anytime you're about to make a job change, that's the right time to do it. Another interesting time where clarity becomes important is anytime you're debating upskilling opportunities, improving your personal branding, or even just trying to get advanced and promoted in a role, this is all predicated on, where do I want to go? So it could be looked at from the sense of like growth, trajectory, or it could be looked at as like, I'm looking for a new job and I need to figure out the direction. So having clarity on where you want to go really never hurts you. I'm not going to say you need to do it all day, every day, forever, but it is a good precursor and a foundation if you're really pursuing any career growth moment. But yeah, if you're not sure and you need a customized timeline for you and based on your needs, work with a mentor, a coach, a peer, someone who can help you figure out how and when and where should this fit into my life.
Very, very cool. All right, we are at time. Rachel, I just want to say again, a huge thank you. I always learn new things when we talk, even though we go over like, the same topic, there's always more to learn. So thank you so much for, sharing your time and your expertise with us. Thank you to our audience members for the questions. Those were great. And I cannot wait to get to do this again with you soon.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.